David Nakamura covers the White House for the Washington Post. He joins me now. Okay, David, let's start with this speech. It was supposed to be a preview of the joint address of Congress that he will be facing next week. How was this perceived by his audience and those outside of the room?
Well, he was, as you mentioned at the top, he's making this appeal to a room full of conservative activists. And he said, started off by saying, finally, you have the president you've been waiting for. And he got some, pretty ruckus applause early on. And, but it was sort of a greatest hits of Donald Trump sort of making big promises again on a number of fronts that we've heard him before without a lot of detail and how he's going to get there. Talking about building a wall with Mexico, sort of rethinking about these trade deals, as you mentioned, undoing Obamacare and potentially replacing it, which we have not seen a lot of great detail about how the path forward. He also attacked the media at parts of his speech and even went, back to ridicule Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, settling some old scores from the campaign trail. So things we've heard before. I think that, looking forward to next week when he's talking to Congress, the question is he's doing sort of these administrative actions and orders, which we've all seen to try to show he's getting off to a fast start. The question is, can he do anything bigger with Congress in a way that, President Obama obviously struggled, especially in the second term, to do anything major because of the polarization. Can Donald Trump with a Republican Congress, move forward on some bigger agenda items?
Speaking of bigger agenda items, he was talking about the things that his administration has done so far, pulling out of TPP, the multiple executive orders. Is it too early for him to be taking a victory lap?
Well, of course, but I don't think he's the only president who wants to try to, send a message that he's getting off to a fast start, whether he is or isn't. And obviously, he had a major setback on one of his, biggest executive orders, which was his travel ban. And they've talked about issuing another one next week. It was supposed to come out this week. They've pushed it back to next week. We'll see what happens. They've said there's not going to be major changes in it, and it could potentially be challenged in court again. So yes, of course, he's going to try to sort of say, look, you've seen me sign all of these things in the Oval Office. They have leather-bound papers and books, but a lot of them, you talk about the one today, a task force to examine unnecessary regulation. What does that really mean? What are they going to come up with? How are they going to get rid of these regulations? What will that mean going forward? And so a lot of the actions that he's taken are sort of directives and sort of pledges of intent. Build a border wall. There's a lot of money you need for that. How are you going to find it? So, yes, it's too early to take a victory lap. There's a lot of work to be done to advance this big agenda he's talked about.
Speaking of big agenda, repealing and replacing Obamacare has been big on his agenda. It's been a point of contention, though, for lawmakers, especially at these town hall meetings. Where does he stand on that?
Yes, well, he's still talking, and so did Vice President Pence just yesterday, talking about, repealing and replacing it. And, lawmakers on Capitol Hill, even conservative lawmakers, have sort of moderated their rhetoric because you're seeing this outpouring at town halls. Yes, some from Democrats, but others from, ordinary citizens who are saying, look, we appreciate the Affordable Care Act. We don't want it to go away if there's no legitimate replacement. And so far, we don't see one. And so it could take a lot longer, certainly, than Donald Trump has talked about, having it done in his first few weeks or months. That's not going to happen. Whether they go forward with a full, sort of repeal or not, it was a big political question. But they're also seeing that it really has real implications out in the communities.
This speech at CPAC that President Trump delivered, it was a very nationalistic tone, very much America first in terms of trade and military. I'm wondering if there's a lot of Steve Bannon in this, and will this line of rhetoric of America first work?
Will it work? Well, it appeals to certainly those who voted for Donald Trump. And obviously you see trends around the world with countries in Europe, even in Asia, moving more toward this sort of populist and nationalist kind of rhetoric and stances. So it's not just the United States or Donald Trump supporters who are feeling some of these anxieties about the changes in the globe. You saw President Obama have a very different message for the country about how to embrace globalism. But Donald Trump, yesterday, you mentioned Steve Bannon, one of his top advisors and strategists in the West Wing. He gave a speech that was sort of filled with, sort of more ideological underpinnings as to why they want to go this way. He talked about sort of, a deconstruction of the administrative state and, this, anti-globalist message that Trump has promoted with closing borders to some degree and, sort of rethinking trade deals in international multilateral institutions. So this would be a major sort of shift in the way both the Democrat and Republican administrations have approached the world, since World War II. And I think you're seeing a White House that continues to sort of express this idea. And I think you're going to see them try to, sort of change the focus of the United States. They're talking America first. I think whether it works or not will depend on how voters feel in 4 years, whether they feel like, they feel safer or they feel their incomes are rising and they're more secure.
I want to ask you about this report. White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus talked to the FBI, apparently to talk down suggestions that the Trump campaign had been in touch with Russia. The FBI declined to do so, apparently. And today, the president lashed out at the agency, and he tweeted this: the FBI is totally unable to stop the national security leakers that have permeated our government for a long time. They can't even find the leakers within the FBI itself. Classified information is being given to the media that could have a devastating effect on U.S. Find now. What's going on here?
Well, look, I mean, Trump has, as we know, has taken this sort of antagonistic tone toward his own intelligence agencies, both the FBI and the CIA, since shortly after the election, when the CIA came out with these revised reports that they believed Russia was meddling in not only meddling in the election by hacking emails of the Democratic Party, but then ultimately in the end trying to release them in a way that helped Donald Trump's candidacy. So, there's been questions about why Donald Trump has, sort of expressed, admiration for Vladimir Putin in Russia, and has sort of seems to want to work closely with Russia. And so when you see this continued sort of antagonism toward these intelligence agencies, it's alarming, obviously, because the president relies on these institutions to provide important information. But for him to say they're leaking and is unfair, to some degree, he's distracting from some of the questions that have been raised with his administration and the resignation of National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, with his connections to the Russian ambassador. And so there's a little bit of a distraction going on, but also continuing this sort of try to focus on the leaks rather than, potential misdoings of his own administration and his own aides.
Yeah, and great point. This investigation is still ongoing, both by the FBI and Congress. Thank you so much, David Nakamura from the
Anytime.
Washington Post. David, we appreciate it.
Thanks.